Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
I'm Sergeant Sullivan, James Patrick Sullivan. I'm with Company K of the 6th Wisconsin. And we were formed out of Mauston, Wisconsin. And we were the only Westerners to fight in the Eastern Theater with the Army of the Potomac. I've been engaged in several different battles, but here at Gettysburg, it's a little different than what we've encountered before. Early in the morning, and this was before sunrise, we were awakened, and this was on the 1st. We had time for a great fine breakfast of hardtack and coffee, but then we were ordered to pack up and get on the road and start heading north toward Gettysburg. Colonel Dawes was leading us, and we started off marching, and we marched for quite a bit before we ended up getting some daylight. And after the daylight, we were marching through and coming toward town. And some of the boys, they like to sing. So there was a unit right ahead of us, and they were Germans, their company. And they started singing, and boy, I'll tell you what, you've never heard such beautiful sound coming from men singing together. Of course, it seems kind of strange that we're singing on the way into a battle, but it's kind of how you take the edge off of what you know is coming later, so you focus on something else, and it was a good way to do it. Well, after the Germans finished singing, when we were marching in, well, we decided we were going to sing too. Of course, we sounded like a bunch of sick cows trying to sing, so it didn't last very long. Shortly after that, Gettysburg was coming into sight. So we formed up our straight lines so we'd come in through the town looking smart. General Gibbons always liked us to look like first-class military. Just as we were coming into town, the townspeople were meeting us and giving us bread, water. They had milk that they had brought out for us. We were filling our canteens, and we were taking whatever we could, and we were trying to eat something on the march, but still staying in our formal lines until we reached through town, and we could hear some cannon fire off on the right, some battles going on over there. And once we got up through town, we were ordered to turn to the left a little, and we got up by the seminary. And once we got up to the seminary, we just came down across the front toward the hill, and we could see the battle going on. Well, General Reynolds had ordered and took up the 2nd and 7th Wisconsin. He'd taken the 19th Indiana and 24th Michigan, and he'd head straight into the wood line, right into the Confederates. Well, we were being held in reserve. We were still at the foot of the seminary, and there were some Confederates coming in from the north, and they were up on a hill coming through the woods. And when they came down across this field, it looked like the ground had swallowed them up. They just disappeared. Well, here they hadn't been swallowed up at all. They had gotten into a railroad cut, and they started firing. And they were firing at the right flank of Reynolds and our boys from the 2nd and 7th Wisconsin, and a couple of other regiments that were up on the hill there. I wasn't sure who all they were, but there was a couple other regiments taking some pretty heavy fire from those Confederates coming through. Well, a rider came up to us, to Colonel Dawes, and said, "General Reynolds has fallen. He's been taken from the field. We think he's dead. General Doubleday has taken command of the field, and he's ordered you and your group to head up into the railroad cut with 2 other regiments, the 14th Brooklyn and the 95th New York." Well, we did, and we took lead with the 95th, and the 14th Brooklyn was on our left flank, and we went straight up into the railroad cut. But it wasn't real easy because we come down off the hill, and we had to cross a road, and there was fences on both sides of the road. So we had to climb over the fence, cross the road, climb over the other fence, and form up. Meanwhile, we're forming up, And some of our boys are dropping like flies. The Confederates are shooting us just as we're trying to load up and form our battle lines. Well, we ended up continuing. We continued straight on in, and we went right into it, and we found out when we got up there, it was Davis's Mississippians who were in that cut. And I think there was another small group there with them, but the most of them were Davis's Mississippians. Well, that battle went on, and it seemed like it was going to be forever. We were just fighting our way through, and we got up to the edge of the cut, and when we were up on top and they were in the bottom, they were trying to get out, we all loaded up and fired. Well, as we were reloading, a lot of us jumped down into the cut. I'd gone up to one officer, and he had drawn his saber, and he went, and I thought he was going to try to strike, but he ended up turning his hilt and handing me the hilt of the saber as he was surrendering. And he went back to get his other boys to try to get them to put their weapons down, because they knew it was going to be a slaughter and they weren't going to win. Well, I had gone up the other side of the railroad cut toward the north side where they had come from, because it was a little lower. I was up there. Here, one of the big rebels, he had taken off. He was going to run back. He was heading west down a railroad line. Well, I ordered him to halt, and he wouldn't. So I took the saber, and I threw it at it with all my might. Well, when I turned my body, it felt like somebody hit me in the left shoulder with a sledgehammer. I went down to my knees, and I just wasn't quite sure what was going on. I was down for a while, and I was kind of disoriented. I don't know whatever happened to the rebel, or if I ever hit him with the sword. But I was down for a while, and once I started to regain my senses a little bit, I thought, well, like a good Irishman, I started to talk to myself. I said, well, Mickey, are you dead or are you just wounded? And I answered myself thinking, well, it must be the latter, because I haven't seen St. Peter yet. So I went to get up, and I did, and I went to reach for my musket, and I got it up, and I went to shoulder it with my left. My left arm wouldn't move. Well, here I'd been shot through the shoulder, and it was bleeding down through my uniform. And I stood there for a minute, and here Sergeant Tarbox, my sergeant, had come up the rank, out of the cut, and he looked at me and he said, Mickey, they got you down, have they? And a shot rang out, and he fell dead right in front of me. Here one of them Rebs had loaded up. Even though he surrendered, he had his musket loaded. He shot him in the back and killed him right in front of me. Well, then he laid his musket down. The rebel did. Well, I had gone back across the cut to the lower side, because our men were forming up, and they were taking the prisoners out. And they had them all lay the weapons down in the grass. Well, they had formed two lines, but our little skirmish lines were kind of thin, because there weren't a whole lot of us left out of Company K and the 6th to escort all these prisoners off the field. So I formed up, held my musket with my right. And I'm walking along, and I could feel the blood running down the inside of my coat, down my pants, and filling my shoe. And my left shoe was just squishing with blood coming out of it. Well, just then, old Daddy Wadsworth had rode up. He was our commander. He come up riding he had brought up some cavalry to help escort the prisoners off the field. Well, a sergeant was with him. A sergeant from the cavalry was with him. And Wadsworth looked at me and said, young man, he says, I don't think you should be here doing this. You don't look too well. And he turned to the sergeant and said, Sergeant, he said, take this man into town to the hospital, and don't leave him until he is seen by a doctor. Well, this good sergeant did. He helped me up on his horse, rode me into town. Well, on the way in, there was a lot of the townswomen out, and they had wine, they had water, they were given the wounded coming in whatever. They had some bandages that they had, and they were running back and forth into the different buildings you could see, and a lot of the buildings had turned into hospitals. Well, I was taken to the courthouse, where I'd run into a couple of doctors that I knew who were from our brigade. And I was talking to them for a minute, and they had me sit down, and, well, they patched up my shoulder and put some kind of a mud patch on it and wrapped it up. And it gave me a couple swigs of brandy, and I went over and sat on the side in the corner, just kind of laid back against the wall. And I wasn't feeling too good. But I stayed there a while. And then when I got to feeling a little better, I did get up. And I started to mull around a little bit and talk to some of the other guys, and I was looking around. And I couldn't believe how many company K men I seen in that hospital. One Tickner had his arm cut off, his left arm cut off. Another guy had his leg removed from the knee down. Another guy had his hip removed. It looked like it was a chunk of beef removed from his left side. Well, we were there for a while, and all of a sudden, we were told, a rider came in and said, well, the 11th Corps was here, but they're pulling back, and they're moving up to Culp's Hill, to this hill up behind the town. Well, all the guys started swearing. They were so pissed about the crescent moon pulling out on us and leaving us there. And it wasn't long after that a Confederate officer had rode up right to the courthouse and rode right into the courthouse on his horse and demanded our surrender. Well, the surgeons there said, there's nobody here but wounded men and us and the band members who were actually acting as nurses and bringing wounded men in. Well, he ordered the surgeons to have a band wrapped around their arm, a white band of cloth, so that they would know that they were nothing more than nurses. Well, he had left and we were there, and later on that evening, I tried to lay down. It was kind of hard because you didn't have our backpacks. We had dropped them when we came into the battle. We didn't have anything, blankets, nothing. We were just laying on a wooden floor. And one of our boys had come up, who was also from the 6th. He said, hey, there's a good place down at the train station. He said, we found some place to get comfortable for the night. So I'd gone down with Ticknor and a couple others, and we went down to the train station, and here there was an officer, and he was a cavalry officer, and he looked like a pretty young man. And some of the locals had put a feather bed out for him, and they had laid him on the feather bed, and they had some bedclothes on for him and a blanket and a small pillow, and he was laying there on his side, but he had died. And I was feeling so bad, I just didn't know. I thought, well, I gotta lay somewhere. So I laid down beside him, and somewhere in the night I fell asleep.